In the late 19th century, as the world teetered on the edge of industrial revolution and empires carved up Africa like a feast, one man's ambition cast a shadow that would haunt an entire region for generations. His name was Leopold II, King of the Belgians. Not a monarch with a grand army or vast territory, but a man with something more dangerous, a dream soaked in blood. Unlike his European counterparts who relied on parliamentary checks or colonial consensus, Leopold operated in secret. He did not conquer the Congo in the name of Belgium. No, he took it for himself. In 1885, during the Berlin Conference where Africa was divided among colonial powers without a single African voice at the table, Leopold's representatives convinced the world that the Congo Free State would be a humanitarian venture, a civilizing mission, a place to end slavery, promote trade, and spread Christianity. But behind that lie was a scheme so insidious that history still struggles to absorb its horror. In truth, Leopold's Congo was a personal possession, a private business empire cloaked as a nation. He named it the Congo Free State, but it was neither free nor a state. It was a plantation, an open-air prison, a stage for a silent genocide. To extract the wealth of the land, primarily ivory and rubber, Leopold established a brutal system of forced labor. The land was divided among concession companies, and these companies were given full authority to do whatever it took to meet quotas. And the quotas were unforgiving. Failure to meet them was punishable by death. Resistance was punishable by mutilation. Escape was answered with fire. One such company, the Anglo-Belgian India Rubber Company, ABIR, became infamous. Its agents scoured the rainforest, herding entire villages into service. Men were ordered to collect wild rubber, scaling trees and slicing vines for the precious white sap that would feed Europe's growing appetite for tires, hoses, and electrical cables. But rubber trees were scarce and scattered. Men had to trek miles through dangerous terrain, without tools, without food, and without rest. Those who returned empty-handed often didn't return at all. The punishment system was a cold calculus of terror. To ensure that soldiers didn't waste bullets while enforcing rubber quotas, officers demanded proof, severed hands of those shot. The force public, Leopold's private army, turned this into a grim economy. If a village rebelled, the soldiers would burn it. If a man resisted, his wife might be taken hostage. If a child cried, the answer was silence, forever. Entire communities disappeared under this reign of extraction. The Congo River, once a symbol of life, flowed with bodies. Historians estimate that between 10 and 15 million Congolese perished during Leopold's rule, either through murder, starvation, disease, or despair. One story, passed down in the oral histories of the Mbol people, tells of a man named Ikonda. A father of 3, he was forced to leave his village to collect rubber. Days turned to weeks. When he failed to meet the quota, soldiers arrived at his village. His wife was beaten. His youngest child, barely 4, was taken into the forest and never returned. When Ikonda came back, he found silence. He wandered the jungle for days, calling their names, until he too vanished. His village says his soul still walks the trees, clutching an empty rubber basket. The most haunting part? All of this was done under the flag of civilization. European investors grew rich. The Belgian crown was adorned with Congolese ivory. Missionaries wrote home about their good work while turning a blind eye to the lash. And yet the world remained silent. It wasn't until the late 1890s that the truth began to leak. A British shipping clerk named Edmund Dean Morel noticed something strange. Ships from the Congo arrived in Europe laden with ivory and rubber, but returned only with guns, chains, and ammunition. No trade, no payment, only tools of control. Morel realized what the world had missed. This was not trade. It was slavery. industrialized, disguised, and defended by royalty. Morel quit his job and began a crusade. He joined forces with missionaries, journalists, and travelers, those few who had seen the horror firsthand. Together with Irish diplomat Roger Casement, they compiled one of the earliest modern human rights investigations, the Casement Report. Photos emerged: children with severed limbs, men whipped to the bone, women tied to trees. The world could no longer look away. But Leopold was a master manipulator. He poured money into propaganda, hired publicists, and even commissioned monuments celebrating his benevolence. To many in Europe, he was still a visionary, until the public tide turned with a roar. Under immense international pressure and scandal, the Belgian government finally forced Leopold to cede control of the Congo in 1908. But it was too late. Millions were gone. An entire society had been broken. Yet, the legacy of Leopold's Congo didn't die with him. Today, the Democratic Republic of Congo is still plagued by instability, corruption, and conflict, rooted in the same resource exploitation that Leopold began. The ghosts of rubber and ivory have become ghosts of coltan and cobalt, minerals used in smartphones, electric cars, and laptops. And once again, Congolese workers, many of them children, risk their lives in dangerous mines for the world's convenience. Leopold may be dead, but the system he built, the idea that Africa is a warehouse for global profit, still haunts the continent. And the world, as it did then, too often looks away. But history remembers. And stories, when told with truth and compassion, can become weapons against silence. This is only the beginning. Blood and conscience. The revelation of Leopold's brutal regime stirred whispers of rebellion and heartbreak deep in the Congolese forests. After the unraveling of his carefully guarded propaganda, a new chapter began. One where the brutal truths of exploitation ignited both despair and defiance in the hearts of those living under tyranny. In the humid darkness of the Congolese jungle, the force public's presence was both omnipresent and terrifying. Soldiers in ragged uniforms, eyes hardened by routine cruelty, patrolled the winding paths between villages. They were not just enforcers of quotas. They were living embodiments of a system that regarded human life as expendable. Their task was simple: ensure that every man and every village delivered enough rubber or face unspeakable punishment. Under the veneer of civilization lay a machinery of terror that had become unstoppable. For many Congolese, the jungle, once a place of mythic beauty and sustenance, had transformed into a landscape of horror. Families would hide in thickets during raids, clutching remnants of their dignity. Elders shared stories in hushed tones around smoldering fires, recounting not only their anguish but also the long-forgotten lore of the land. A lore of resilience, of resistance, of connection to an earth that nurtured them long before foreign greed had arrived. In one such tale, a young man named Kanda became a reluctant hero. Kanda was once a farmer whose life revolved around the cycles of planting and harvest, a life intertwined with the natural rhythms of the river and forest. But the demands of Leopold's regime pulled him from the field and thrust him into forced labor. His sinewy arms, accustomed to the gentle toil of the soil, were now bound by chains. Each day, he was driven into the depths of the forest, where he and countless other workers were herded like cattle to extract the elusive rubber. The weight of his chains and the whips of his overseers became symbols of a modern-day bondage that left no soul untouched. One humid morning, as the mist curled around the towering trees, Kanda's spirit broke. Faced with the relentless brutality, the loss of his family, the suffering of his neighbors, he made a choice that carried both peril and the seed of hope. In an act of desperate courage, Kanda rallied a small band of survivors. They took refuge in a hidden valley crisscrossed by natural streams. Here, away from the prying eyes of the colonial enforcers, They nurtured a secret rebellion, fueled not only by anger, but by an unwavering determination to reclaim their lives. Their rebellion was a mosaic of quiet sabotage and outright defiance. The rebels would ambush rubber collection convoys, liberating those who were on the brink of collapse. In the hidden glens of the forest, they held clandestine meetings by moonlight, discussing plans in whispers as if the trees themselves might carry their secrets to the oppressors. Every liberated laborer added a new thread of resistance, a growing network that defied the notion that Leopold's brutal rule was absolute. At the same time, far across the Atlantic, a parallel struggle was unfolding, a clash of conscience within Europe. Figures like Edmund Dean Morel and Roger Casement were not content to let these atrocities remain hidden in the shadows. Through painstaking investigations and a flood of shocking first-hand accounts, they compiled evidence that would shake the very foundations of European colonial pride. Newspapers erupted with exposés that revealed the grotesque reality behind the veneer of a humanitarian mission. The world began to awaken to a nightmare disguised as progress. Casement's reports detailed scenes of unbearable suffering, villages decimated by violent raids, children left orphaned amidst the rubble of their once thriving communities, and an endless procession of severed hands as proof of broken promises. In boardrooms across Europe, investors and politicians began to question the financial gains that had come at the cost of millions of lives. The moral reckoning was slow, but it was relentless. Public outcry, once a whisper of condemnation, grew into a roar demanding justice for Congo's countless victims. Back in the heart of Africa, the cries of rebellion and the echoes of international outrage converged. For the Congolese, the struggle was not just about survival, it was a fight for identity and dignity. Amidst the struggle, the old legends of the forest took on new meaning. The spirits of ancestors, once thought to be distant myths, were believed to walk beside the rebels. These spectral guardians offered silent courage, whispering promises of liberation in the rustling leaves. The juxtaposition of brutal colonial machinery against the profound spirituality of the Congolese people created a tapestry of resistance that was both heart-wrenching and awe-inspiring. For every act of rebellion, however, the cost was steep. The colonial forces responded with a fury that shattered entire villages. In one such brutal reprisal, a remote settlement was reduced to ashes after a rebel ambush. Survivors fled into the jungle, their eyes hollow with grief and fire. The scars of such events etched themselves into the collective memory, becoming ghost stories told in every refugee camp, every hastily constructed shelter. A chilling reminder that the price of defiance was often paid in blood. Yet, in that relentless cycle of violence and retribution, a strange form of beauty emerged, the beauty of the human spirit's refusal to be silenced. Some of the rebels, despite their hardened exteriors, took care to shield the vulnerable. They rescued women, children, and the elderly, knowing that the future of their people depended on nurturing hope amid despair. The covert networks they built were not just channels for strategic coordination. They were lifelines, threading together communities scarred by loss and brutality. In the corridors of power back in Belgium, the revelations led to a crisis of conscience. Intellectuals, artists, and even members of the elite began to question the moral implications of Leopold's Congo. Debates were sparked in salons and parliamentary sessions. The very idea of empire as a benevolent force offering civilization to distant lands was being dismantled by the weight of irrefutable evidence. Yet, this shift in perspective came too late for the millions who had already suffered. As the international campaign against Leopold's regime gathered momentum, the question on every voice's lips was, can justice ever repair what has been so deeply broken? The answer was as elusive as the last vestiges of freedom in a land ruled by terror. But for the people of the Congo, the struggle had already transformed them. They were no longer just victims of a remote king's greed. They were active participants in a reshaping of destiny, a collective determination that the scars of the past would forge the strength to reclaim their homeland. Though the regime would eventually crumble under the weight of its own inhumanity, the damage was indelible. The present-day challenges faced by the Democratic Republic of Congo, corruption, continuous resource exploitation, and recurring conflict, are echoes of that brutal epoch. Modern-day struggles for fair resource distribution, environmental protection, and human rights speak to the same battle against a system that once devalued human life for profit. In the end, the story of Congo under Leopold II is a dual narrative of horror and hope, a brutal saga of exploitation but also a testament to the resilience of the human spirit. The seeds of defiance planted in the dense jungles of the Congo have grown into a long, tortuous struggle for justice and recognition, one that still reverberates in every corner of the nation. As dusk falls over the battered landscape, the voices of the past remind us. History may be written in blood, but it is also written by those who dare to stand against the tide. The rebellion that began with stolen labor and unspeakable cruelty continues to echo, urging the world never to forget the lessons born out of the darkest hours of human greed. Shadows of reckoning. As the embers of defiance glowed deep within the Congolese forests, the struggle entered a phase of reckoning, a confrontation of the darkness that had been sown by relentless greed. The clandestine networks of rebels, once a fragile spark in the dense jungle undergrowth, had now grown into a force that demanded acknowledgement from a world awakening to the horrors of colonial brutality. These were not isolated incidents of savagery. They were part of a systemic structure that demanded a reckoning in every corner of the Congo and far beyond. In the villages scattered along the winding tributaries of the great river, life had become a daily act of survival. The rebels continued their covert operations, risking everything with each act of defiance. In a modest encampment hidden beneath a canopy of towering palms, a council of elders and warriors met under the moon's pallid glow. Among them was Ao, a seasoned fighter whose weathered face bore the countless stories of loss and resistance. With measured words and steely resolve, he reminded his companions that every act of liberation was a step toward reclaiming their stolen identity. For Ao, the legacy of suffering was intertwined with a fierce hope that the injustice meted out in the name of progress and profit could no longer be allowed to stand unchallenged. Beyond the confines of the forest, international winds of change began to stir. Journalists, human rights activists, and inquisitive souls from Europe and America arrived in the Congo, bearing not only cameras and notepads but also an earnest desire to uncover the truth. Their reports painted a picture of a land suffocated by exploitation, a vast wilderness where once thriving communities were reduced to husks by a system designed to extract wealth at any cost. Among these intrepid souls was a young reporter named Isabella, whose journey took her into the heart of the chaos. With every village she visited, every face etched with sorrow and defiance, she gathered the stories of those who had been silenced for too long. Her words would later travel across continents, sparking outrage and calls for reform in parliaments far from the humid tropics. Isabella's articles not only documented the brutal reality, but also highlighted the resilience of the Congolese people. In one account, she described a midnight rescue operation where rebels freed a group of laborers destined for an unspeakable fate. In the chaos of smoke and distant gunfire, the rebels moved like shadows, swift, silent, and determined to restore at least a semblance of dignity. These rescued souls, many of whom had witnessed incomprehensible horrors, would later become living testimonies in international courts, demanding justice for the relentless cruelty inflicted upon them. But even as the world began to shine a spotlight on the atrocities, the machinery of oppression was not idle. For Leopold, whose legacy was built on the extraction of every last drop of wealth, there remained a persistent effort to conceal the truth. Propaganda machines churned out narratives of civilizing missions and progress, rebranding the violence as mere collateral in the march toward modernity. In the shadowed halls of power in Europe, business magnates and government officials hesitated between the moral outrage of the public and the lucrative profits that flowed from the exploitation of African resources. This conflict of conscience was not new, but it was becoming increasingly untenable as evidence mounted and voices of dissent grew louder. As international pressure mounted, the Congolese resistance became a beacon for similar movements elsewhere. Stories of secret meetings and daring rescues spread along the riverbanks and in distant camps where exiles gathered. In a humble village that had once been known for its vibrant festivals and spirited dances, an elder recounted a myth passed down through generations. It told of a mighty river that washed away the sins of the past, promising renewal if only the people dared to stand up against the oppressive tide. This myth, once a simple fable, now served as a metaphor for their reality, a call to arms and a prayer for redemption. In the meantime, the human cost of the regime's brutality continued to exact its toll. The physical scars were visible, whippings, amputations, and broken bodies. But the psychological wounds ran even deeper. Mothers clutched their children tightly, haunted by memories of nights filled with terror and the unspeakable sounds of rebellion. Fathers, too, were marked by a silent fury, a determination that, even in the face of overwhelming power, their dignity could never be entirely stolen. These personal tragedies imbued the collective memory of the Congo with an enduring anger, a force that could not be quelled by mere decrees or diplomatic niceties. Simultaneously, the winds of change began to reach Leopold's own doorstep. The exposure of the Congo's dark underbelly led to heated debates in the corridors of European power. Intellectuals, philanthropists, and even artists began to denounce the system that had enriched a few at the expense of millions. Portraits of dignity, resilience, and hope adorned public spaces, a stark counterpoint to the grim images emerging from the heart of Africa. These voices, once marginalized by the dominant narrative of progress, now resonated with a force that made it impossible to ignore the crimes of the past. However, as the colonial regime weakened under the weight of global condemnation, a bitter irony began to surface. The very efforts to dismantle Leopold's empire did not immediately alleviate the suffering of those who had borne its brunt. The newly promised reforms were, in many respects, slow to materialize. The modern Republic of the Congo inherited an administrative structure built on exploitation, a legacy that would be tested time and again by the persistent demands for justice and reform. Even as international commissions and reformers stepped in to oversee transitions, the deep-seated scars of Leopold's reign left an indelible mark on the national psyche. For the Congolese people, the struggle for dignity became entwined with a broader battle against a system that had long treated their land as a commodity. The rubber and ivory replaced by tantalizing modern resources, such as coltan and cobalt, served as a constant reminder that the battle was not merely historical. It was ongoing. Activists in contemporary Congo decried new cycles of exploitation, where multinational corporations and corrupt officials continued to reap benefits from natural resources without ensuring that local communities received their fair share. The lessons of the past, etched into the jungles and rivers, were a somber mirror reflecting modern injustices. In the twilight of a turbulent era, amid the clamor for accountability and the struggle to reclaim their heritage, the voices of the Congolese continued to rise. Their call was not only for reparations or apologies. It was a demand for recognition of their resilience, for an end to the system that had long reduced them to mere cogs in a machine of global profit. The struggle had morphed into a broader quest for human rights, where the echoes of yesterday's horrors fueled the determination to shape a more just tomorrow. As shadows lengthened and the remnants of the old regime were dismantled piece by piece, the Congo stood at a crossroads. The overwhelming legacy of brutal extraction and systematic dehumanization had left deep fissures in the fabric of society. Yet, from those very fissures, a renewed hope emerged, a belief that the pain of history could be transformed into a catalyst for profound change. The rebels, the activists, the survivors, and even those who had been complicit in the system were now entwined in an inexorable march toward accountability, their every step a defiant refusal to let the past be erased without consequence. In this pivotal moment, as the international community began to acknowledge the full extent of Leopold's crimes, the Congo's narrative shifted from one of silent suffering to a chorus of determined voices. It was a story marked by tremendous loss, yet one that held within it the seeds of rebirth, a promise that the deepest scars might someday heal, and that the land, in its ancient wisdom, could once again nurture a future defined by justice and dignity. The echo of tomorrow. In the quiet aftermath of a long and brutal struggle, the Congo of today still bore the echoes of a dark past, a past that had been defined by greed, pain, and relentless resistance. As the smoke of colonial exploitation finally began to clear, the nation stood at a crossroads, burdened by the historical scars left behind by Leopold II's inhumane regime yet fueled by the unyielding spirit of its people. The damp air of the Congolese evening carried memories of both sorrow and defiance. Communities rebuilt their lives among the ruins, forging bonds in the fires of shared loss and hope. The land that was once exploited for its rubber and ivory now whispered a promise that the struggle for dignity was a call that transcended time. Former rebels, now elders and leaders in their own right, recounted their experiences with a fierce pride. Their stories were not just personal accounts of survival, but powerful testimonies to the resilience of a people who had risen, time and again, from the ashes of tyranny. In the glow of a setting sun, a council of community leaders gathered in a clearing near the banks of the Great Congo River. Their voices, soft yet resolute, blended into a harmonious pledge, a vow that the legacy of suffering would never be forgotten and that the quest for justice would continue unabated. They spoke of the international movement that had once rallied to expose the atrocities of Leopold's rule, emphasizing that change was possible when the world united in pursuit of truth. As debates and discussions rippled through the villages and towns, a younger generation emerged, one that had grown up hearing the legends of resistance, whose lives were shaped by the courageous sacrifices of their ancestors. This new generation was determined to redefine their destiny, advocating for sustainable development, fair resource management, and human rights. It was a generation that questioned the remnants of an exploitative system, challenging corrupt practices in government and multinational corporations that still saw the Congo's vast resources as a mere commodity. Meanwhile, in the corridors of modern power, both within Africa and in distant capitals, the lingering consequences of Leopold's exploitation continued to fuel debates on ethics and accountability. Activists, scholars, and international organizations raised voices, demanding that reparations and genuine reforms replace the charade of development aid. They argued that the immense wealth extracted during those dark years had created a cycle of poverty and conflict that still trapped the Congolese people. The struggle was no longer only a historical lesson, but a living challenge to eradicate the continuing injustices of resource exploitation and political manipulation. Over time, public consciousness shifted as technology and media brought the stories of the Congo to a global audience. Documentaries, photojournalism, and social media campaigns became modern-day torches, illuminating the paths taken by those who had suffered and those who fought back. The narrative of the Congo evolved into a powerful movement, a call to the international community to embrace true accountability, to invest in fair trade, and to support initiatives that return wealth to the people of Africa. In local communities, the transformation was equally poignant. Through grassroots education and advocacy, Children learned about the history of their land not as distant tragedies, but as integral parts of a collective struggle for freedom and dignity. They learned that their heritage was one of resilience and courage, a heritage that was as much about fighting for justice as it was about healing wounds of the past. In schools and community centers, elders shared vivid stories of the old days, speaking not only of the cruelty inflicted by a foreign king, but also of the indomitable spirit that refused to be broken. The stories served as both a reminder and a reminder of the need to remember and honor the past, and a call to build a better future grounded in equality and human rights. The narrative of Leopold's Congo, with its layers of brutality, defiance, and eventual reckoning, came to symbolize a broader fight against injustice. It became a mirror reflecting the modern challenges that still plagued regions where the echoes of exploitation had never fully faded. In a world where natural resources remained at the center of fierce international competition, the lessons of the Congo offered a crucial reminder. True progress could only be achieved when human dignity was placed above profit. As the Congo continued its journey toward recovery and unity, a poignant shift took place, a convergence of the personal and the political. From the towering canopy of the rainforest to the bustling streets of Kinshasa, the collective memory of past atrocities spurred a determination to ensure that history would not repeat itself. Communities organized truth and reconciliation meetings, cultural festivals, and memorial events to honor the victims of the colonial regime and to celebrate the resilient spirit that had carried them through the darkest days. The wounds inflicted by Leopold's exploitation, though still visible in many areas, were now the impetus for healing and transformation. The echoes of the past reached even into the lives of those living far from the Congo. In cities around the world, informed citizens began to question the origins of the consumer goods they held in their hands. From the smartphones packed with conflict minerals to the luxury products derived from resources exploited under modern conditions reminiscent of colonial times. Public debates, policy discussions, and ethical consumer movements emerged as global citizens demanded that companies and governments not forget the cost of progress. Now, as the final chapter of the story draws to a close, a profound truth emerges. The fight for justice and human dignity is both a tribute to the past and a promise for the future. The darkest chapters of the Congo's history teach us that silence in the face of injustice is as dangerous as the actions that perpetrate it. They remind us that while progress can be marred by exploitation, it can also be redeemed by the courage and unity of those who refuse to be oppressed. To all of you watching, this is more than history. It is a call to action. As we remember the victims and survivors of King Leopold's brutal reign, let us also honor their legacy by becoming vigilant custodians of truth and justice in our own lives. Stand up against modern forms of exploitation, question the systems that profit from injustice, and support efforts that aim to bring fairness and dignity to all. If this story has resonated with you, if you believe in the power of remembrance to ignite positive change, then take a stand with us. Like, subscribe, and share this journey with others. Let these stories not fade into silence but continue to echo in every conversation about human rights and justice. Together, we can ensure that the lessons of the past serve as the foundation for a more compassionate future. Every like, every share, and every subscription is a step towards keeping history alive and driving forward the conversation for a better tomorrow. Let the memory of the Congo under Leopold II remind us that the human spirit, though scarred by cruelty, is capable of extraordinary resilience, and that together, we can build a world where justice triumphs over exploitation. Thank you for following this journey. Remember, each of us has the power to make a difference. Stand up for justice and help illuminate the truths that history teaches us. If this narrative moved you, please take action by subscribing, liking, and sharing this message with others who believe that history must inform our present and guide our future.